What if the simple act of sitting in the wrong seat wasn't wrong at all, but revealed everything broken in a system built to look polite? Two brothers board a flight with first-class tickets, but what happens next will challenge more than just protocol. It'll test silence, legacy, and the true cost of being seen. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Kaylin Bry stood quietly in line at Gate 3A of Redbridge International Airport. The early morning light filtered through the wide windows, casting a soft gold over the polished tile floor. He held his boarding pass in one hand and rested the other gently on the strap of his old canvas backpack. Next to him, his younger brother Taryn bounced slightly on the balls of his feet, earbuds in, nodding to a rhythm only he could hear. They weren't dressed for first class, not by the usual standards. Kaylin wore a navy blue sweater over a white button-down, sleeves neatly rolled. His jeans were pressed but plain. Taryn had on a hoodie and joggers, fresh sneakers, but nothing flashy. No briefcases, no leather duffels, just them, two young black men with economy in their posture and intention. The sign above read, Solera Skyways, Flight 2147 to Sacramento, boarding first class now. Taryn pulled out his boarding pass, grinned, and nudged Kaylin with his elbow. "Can't believe Dad booked us in front row," he said under his breath. "I thought he only flew coach for the principal." Kaylin gave a quiet chuckle. Maybe the principal's getting older. As they stepped forward, Kaylin felt the subtle shift in the air. Not the physical kind, but the kind you feel in your skin when someone's watching. At the counter stood a woman with steel gray hair tied back into a tight bun. Her name tag read, Marla, lead cabin crew. She didn't smile. She didn't glance. She studied. Her eyes flicked from Kaylin to Taryn and back again, then scanned down their clothes, their bags, and finally to the boarding passes in their hands. Her lips barely moved, but her voice cut clean. "You two sure this is your gate?" Kaylin blinked, surprised. "Yes, ma'am. Flight 2147, first class." Her gaze didn't soften. "Did someone upgrade you by mistake?" Kaylin paused, choosing his words. "No upgrade. The tickets were purchased directly. We're heading to see our grandmother in Sacramento." She stared for a moment longer, then extended her hand stiffly. Kaylin passed her both boarding passes. She scanned them, her brow furrowed as if reading a difficult passage. The scanner beeped, clear and clean, but she hesitated still, before finally handing them back. "Proceed," she said flatly. Kaylin gave a short nod, placing a hand gently on Taryn's shoulder. Taryn, half-turned, muttered just loud enough for Kaylin to hear. "You think she asks everyone that?" Kaylin didn't answer. They walked down the jet bridge with a slow hush of heavy wheels rolling behind them, pulling their bags. The closer they got to the aircraft door, the quieter it seemed. The world shrank to the sound of their shoes on the metal flooring and the low hum of the engines preparing for takeoff. Inside the plane, the cabin lights glowed a soft amber. Seats in first class were wide and crisp, trimmed in gray leather with white linen headrests embroidered with Solara's Sunburst logo. Kaylin and Taryn found their seats, 1A and 1B. Kaylin sat by the window, folding his backpack gently beneath the seat. He noticed a businessman across the aisle glance at them, then quickly look away. A woman in pearls and heels flipped through a magazine, but not before her gaze lingered an extra second longer than necessary. Taryn leaned back and exhaled, popping one earbud out. "You'd think we walked in wearing ski masks," he whispered. Kaylin smiled faintly but didn't laugh. He looked out the window as the sky shifted from gray to pink. Marla passed through the cabin, her heels quiet on the carpet, but her presence unmistakable. She didn't speak. She didn't smile, but she looked. Her eyes moved over them like a security scanner, looking for what didn't belong. Kaylin met her gaze for a brief second, not confrontational, not inviting, just enough to register that he saw her seeing them. He looked back out the window. The reflection of her figure moved past the glass and vanished as she continued down the aisle. Kaylin turned his head slightly, voice soft. "We paid the price of admission." Taryn looked over. "What?" Kaylin didn't repeat it. He just settled back in his seat, eyes forward now, watching as the world outside the plane turned from still to motion. He kept his voice inside this time, as if saying it out loud might make it real. But in his mind it stayed. We paid the price of admission, but maybe that's never been enough. The plane had leveled off, humming softly as it glided westward through morning clouds. Kalen sat with his hands folded in his lap, fingers resting lightly against each other. The flight attendants moved down the aisle with polished efficiency, offering drinks and politely rehearsed smiles. Yet when they reached row 1, those smiles tightened. Their eyes paused a beat too long. Kalen felt it, not the kind of thing you could prove, but the kind that made your skin pull back just slightly. It wasn't the words, it was the weight behind them, the kind of silence that asked a question without saying anything at all. Taran, in the seat beside him, tapped his fingers along the armrest, a rhythm building in his restlessness. He'd taken out his earbuds but hadn't replaced them. Instead, he stared ahead, jaw clenched, eyes darting toward the attendants. "They keep staring," he muttered, "like we're holding someone else's seat." Kalen didn't look up. He had a paperback open, some book he'd promised himself he'd read months ago, but the words blurred halfway down every page. He turned it anyway, just to look like he was fine. "They're doing their job," Kalen said softly, knowing even as he said it that it wasn't enough, that it wasn't honest. Taran leaned closer. "Come on, man. This isn't about peanuts and seatbelts. You feel it too." Kalen gave the faintest nod. His lips pressed together. He glanced out the window, watching cloud banks pass below them like frozen rivers. In the quiet that followed, memory stirred. A summer afternoon, 2 boys splashing in a community pool, laughing loud and easy. A whistle, then silence. A man in uniform and a woman with a clipboard stepping up beside their father. "You'll need to leave. This pool is for members only." "But I paid," their father said, calm and low. "That doesn't change the policy," she replied without looking at the receipt in his hand. Kalen remembered the way he'd shouted, his voice higher back then, but full of heat. "That's not fair," he had screamed, while Taran clung to the edge of the pool, too young to understand but old enough to feel shame settle in. Their father never raised his voice, just nodded, gathered their towels and walked them out, shoes squeaking on wet concrete. Back on the plane, Kalen exhaled, long and slow. "That day," I yelled, he said quietly. Dad stayed silent. Today I wonder if silence was ever enough. Taran looked over, eyes narrowing. "So you're just gonna let it slide?" Kalen didn't answer immediately. He closed the book and rested it on his leg. "You think yelling helps?" "I think silence doesn't." Taran's voice wasn't angry, not exactly, just disappointed, frustrated in a way that didn't quite know where to land. Kalen turned to face him. "What do you want me to do? Pull out a badge? Drop a name? You think that'll change how she looked at us back there?" "One message," Taran said, holding up his phone. "That's all it takes. You know he'll fix this in 2 minutes." Kalen stared at the screen. The name Dad sat at the top of his text history, untouched. He pulled out his phone and opened a new message. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Hey, something happened. Can you talk to someone at the airline?" He paused, read it back. Then slowly, deliberately, erased it. Taran watched him. "Seriously?" Kalen nodded once. "And then what, Taran?" "We win for the wrong reason. Not because we were right, but because of who he is." Taran leaned back in his seat, folded his arms. "Sometimes the wrong reason is the only reason people listen." Kalen didn't reply. He stared down at the unsent message again, thumb hovering over the send button. For a moment, the weight of that one action felt heavier than anything else on the plane. He didn't send it. Instead, he hit delete. The screen blinked and it was gone. In its place, his thoughts whispered, "They think we don't belong." Not sure if that hurts more or just feels normal now. The seat was quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of stillness that made a person wonder if silence had ever really protected them at all. The minutes ticked by in uneasy quiet. Outside the cabin windows, the sky stretched pale and endless, a soft blanket of clouds just out of reach. Inside, everything looked calm. Business travelers sipping ginger ale, a woman flipping through a lifestyle magazine, a man watching a muted news broadcast on his seat screen. But for Kalen, calm had nothing to do with it. It was quiet, yes, but only the kind that comes before a storm. He watched a flight attendant move down the aisle with the beverage cart, stopping every few rows, taking polite requests. She handed a club soda to the man across from them, then poured apple juice for the woman by the aisle. When she reached row 1, her pace slowed. Marla Denwick appeared from the galley behind her. She wasn't pushing a cart. She wasn't smiling. She walked straight up to Kalen and Taryn, arms folded neatly at her waist like she'd been waiting for a reason. "I'll need to see your boarding passes again," she said. Her voice was even but stripped of any warmth. It wasn't a question. It was a command, tucked in corporate politeness. Kalen felt Taryn shift beside him, shoulders tense. He didn't speak. He reached into his pocket and handed over both passes, trying to keep his movements slow and deliberate. Calm, always calm. Marla studied the tickets like she'd never seen one before. She flipped them back and forth, checking names, seat numbers, scanning the barcode again with the handheld reader. Beep. Confirmed. She stared at the screen a second longer than necessary. "You're sure these are your seats?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "Yes, ma'am," Kalen said. "We boarded properly. You scanned them yourself at the gate." Taryn couldn't help himself. "Are you going to ask every black passenger to show their ticket twice, or just us?" Marla's eyes flicked toward him, but didn't respond. People were watching now. Kalen saw it in the subtle movements, the way a man paused his typing, the way a woman turned down the volume on her headset, and yet none of them said a word. A white-haired man sitting diagonally across from them opened his mouth, then caught Marla's eye and promptly turned away. Marla straightened her back. "Until we confirm, I must ask you both to move to the rear galley area temporarily." Kalen stared at her. "And the reason?" She didn't flinch. "Standard procedure." "For what?" "Until it's verified." Kalen leaned back slightly, still seated. "Is there a system that flags us, or just your instinct?" Her jaw tightened, but she kept her tone flat. "Sir, I'm not required to explain procedures." He didn't move right away. Neither did Taryn. Kalen looked around. Not a single passenger said anything. Not one voice rose in question. He stood finally, quietly gathering his bag from under the seat. Taryn followed, jaw clenched tight. They were led past rows of strangers, their presence now more spectacle than passenger. The rear galley area was narrow and unwelcoming. They stood near the emergency exit for nearly 20 minutes. No explanation, no updates. When Marla returned, she was accompanied by another crew member who avoided eye contact. "You may return to your seats now," she said. When they reached row 1 again, 2 new passengers, an older couple, white, dressed in tailored linen, were already sitting in 1A and 1B. Kalen looked down at them, then at Marla. "Our seats," he said simply. Marla responded with a tilt of the head. Those were their original seats. There was a mix-up. Happened sometimes. Taryn's voice cracked before he could stop it. "This is BS." He took a step forward, but Kalen reached across his chest, stopping him. Kalen turned toward Marla, his voice low but carrying more weight than before. "You're not asking for our tickets anymore," he said. "You're asking for our silence." Marla didn't respond. She didn't have to. Her face had already answered. A flight attendant pointed them to 2 empty seats further back. Row 6, bulkhead. Not economy, but not what they paid for either. They sat. Kalen didn't speak. He just stared straight ahead, fists loosely closed. Taryn broke the silence. "What now?" Kalen reached for his phone. His hands weren't shaking this time. He typed a message. "Need to talk. Not for us. For the system." He hit send. No hesitation. The conference room at Solaris Skyway's headquarters in downtown Chicago was all glass and hush. High windows poured in filtered sunlight over the polished table where executives discussed route expansions, partnerships, and market trends. Osric Bry sat at the far end, his hands folded lightly on a leather folder, listening but not really hearing. His phone buzzed once in his jacket pocket. He glanced at it, then turned it face up on the table. Just one message from Kalen. "Need to talk. Not for us. For the system." The room buzzed with low, professional chatter. Someone from marketing talking about loyalty upgrades, another from legal raising points about international compliance. But for Osric, the noise faded. His eyes drifted toward the picture frame beside him. It was small, easy to miss, but it held a photo that stayed steady in his heart. Kaylin and Taryn, arms around each other, barefoot on the back porch of their Virginia home, grinning like boys who still believed the world was fair. Osric slid his chair back and stood. "Excuse me, I need 10 minutes." He stepped out quietly. No one questioned him. That was the kind of authority he carried, not loud but undeniable. Inside his private office, Osric moved slowly. He closed the door, pulled down the blinds. The light softened, the air felt thicker. He sank into the chair behind his desk and reread the message. Then he picked up his office phone. "Gail," he said, voice low, "I need a full report on any passenger incident from Flight 2147, inbound to Sacramento this morning. I want unfiltered logs, crew communications, ticket scans, all of it." The assistant on the other end hesitated. "That's a direct operations file, sir. Do you want me to contact compliance first?" "Number not yet. Just pull the data quietly. Send it to me." "Yes, Mr. Bry." He hung up, staring at the screen for a long moment. His mind drifted, not to the boardroom, but back to a night 15 years ago. Kaylin had just turned 13. He'd come home from school with a black eye and a disciplinary slip. The story involved a teacher, a cafeteria misunderstanding, and a classmate who accused Kaylin of stealing. That night, Osric had sat beside his son on the porch swing. "Did you take it?" he asked gently. Kaylin shook his head. "Number. But they already decided I did." Osric had said something then, something that stuck with both of them. "You'll be judged for how you carry your name before anyone knows it. Make sure they never forget who you really are." Kaylin had looked up and asked, "Have you ever used your name to protect us?" Osric answered carefully, "I used it, but not always where you could see it." Now, sitting in that quiet office, Osric felt the weight of those words return, like a long-forgotten promise knocking gently at the door. Meanwhile, Kaylin and Taryn had landed in Sacramento. They moved through the airport in silence. There were no apologies waiting at the gate, no messages from the airline, just the quiet shuffle of people gathering bags and heading off into the day. Outside, the air smelled dry and faintly sweet, like eucalyptus and warm asphalt. Kaylin didn't speak as they waited for their ride. He just opened his backpack and pulled out a soft, worn notebook, the one he usually saved for lecture notes and class ideas. But this time, he didn't write a lesson plan. He wrote a feeling. This wasn't about our seats. It was about who they expected to sit there and who they didn't. Back in Chicago, Osric received the initial file. It came without commentary, just raw documentation. He scrolled through the notes, read the crew logs, the behavioral observation marked casually against Kaylin and Taryn's names. Nothing verified, just impressions. Just a flag for recheck. Osric called the head of HR, Pauline Rennick. She picked up on the second ring. "I need to flag a matter for internal review," he said calmly. "What's the nature of it?" she asked. "Passenger treatment. Flight 2147. This morning." A pause. "This sounds personal to you, sir." Osric's voice stayed steady. "Everything about people is personal, and if this wasn't my son, it could have been yours." There was no follow-up question, just a quiet acknowledgement on the other end of the line. "Understood. I'll begin the inquiry." Osric hung up and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if answers might be written in the quiet. Across the country, in the back seat of the rideshare car, Kaylin glanced at his brother, who had fallen asleep against the window. His thoughts drifted again, not to what had happened, but what would come next. If we don't speak, they assume we're fine, he thought. But if we speak now, will they ever hear the message or just see the messenger? The car turned onto a long avenue lined with tall trees and old brick buildings, casting slow-moving shadows over the windshield. The kind of light that doesn't blind you, but doesn't let you look away either. Morning Finch Cafe sat quietly on the corner of Chestnut and Lyle, just far enough from downtown Sacramento to avoid the noise, but close enough to carry the weight of the world in its walls. It was the kind of place that had soft chairs, chipped mugs, and regulars who didn't need to place their orders anymore. Kalen Bry sat near the back, his coffee long since cold, the rim of the mug stained with one half-hearted sip. His laptop sat open in front of him, screen glowing softly against the warm tones of wood and afternoon sunlight. His eyes weren't on the street outside. They were locked on the email in his inbox, a message marked anonymous. Subject line, "You're not alone." He read it once, then again, slowly. Mr. Bry, you don't know me, but I worked at Solara Skyways for 11 years. I shared 5 flights with Marla Denwick. On 3 of them, I watched her make passengers like you feel like they didn't belong. Each time I filed a quiet complaint. Each time, nothing happened. There are others. At least 5 incidents I know of. No formal action ever taken. They called it a misunderstanding, a training issue, a one-off. You're not the first, Mr. Bry, but maybe you can be the last. He leaned back in his chair, breath shallow. The words hit harder than he expected. Not because they were shocking, but because they weren't. Somewhere deep down, he had already suspected this wasn't about just him and Taryn, but seeing it laid out, 5 other families, 5 other quiet humiliations, it made the air feel heavier in his lungs. A video call pinged across his screen. Osric. Kalen clicked to answer. His father's face filled the window, framed by the clean lines of his Chicago office. Behind him, a bookshelf stood tall, rows of aviation history, civil rights memoirs, and framed photos of airfields and family. Osric didn't waste time. I got the internal log, he said. Kalen leaned forward. And? Osric tapped the edge of his desk. There's a pattern. They kept them unofficial, notes made on internal systems, not formal complaints. Words like flagged for non-compliance and observation required. All vague, all subjective. About Marla? Her name comes up too often to be random. Kalen swallowed. His fingers traced the chipped edge of his coffee cup. They thought they were containing damage, Osric said quietly, but what they're doing is recycling it. That line sat with Kalen. Heavy, true. For years, he had taught his students about systems, how bias isn't always loud, how it slips through paperwork and smiles and the benefit of the doubt. He had stood behind podiums explaining these things, but it was different now. This wasn't theory. It was personal. Did they respond to anything yet? Kalen asked. They're considering moving her, not firing her, just repurposing. Office administration off the floor. Kalen felt the words wrap around his chest like a belt, like changing the seat cushions and calling it a new plane, he muttered. Osric didn't argue. He just looked at him, father to son, silence full of meaning. Kalen closed the laptop slowly. If I go public with this, he said, they'll say it's a tantrum, that I'm pulling strings. They might. They'll say I'm trying to leverage your name. They probably will. He looked over at the next table, where a woman in her 70s sipped tea with a man who looked like her son. They were laughing softly. Kalen thought about how different their flight might have been, about how that same woman might have looked at him differently if she were in seat 2C. Across the table, Taryn sat with his headphones around his neck, scrolling his phone. His eyes were calm, but there was still a hurt beneath them, a kind of quiet bruise that didn't show on skin. Kalen watched him for a moment, then stood up. I think it's time we change the conversation, he said, mostly to himself, then louder. Not for us, for everyone she made feel like less. Taryn looked up. You're gonna write it? Kalen nodded. Not a complaint, a statement. That night in the low light of his living room, Kalen typed a new email. He addressed it to the executive leadership team of Solara Skyways. No greeting, no title, just the truth. Subject, a passenger's observation from seat 1. A body, you don't know my name, but you should know what I saw and what I chose not to forget. I sat in a seat that was paid for, earned, and still questioned. I was moved without reason, silenced without cause, watched without justification. You don't have to wonder if it happened. You just have to decide what you'll do now that you know it did. He hit send. Then he closed the laptop. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Inside, Kalen sat still, the glow of the screen replaced by something steadier. Conviction. The conference room at Solara Skyways headquarters wasn't the biggest on the floor, but it was the one they used when no one wanted it on the calendar. No press, no notes, no minutes taken. Just decision makers and what they could live with afterward. There were no nameplates on the table, no recording devices, just a long polished surface, a silver pitcher of water, and a single folder placed neatly in the center. It was labeled in quiet black print, Behavioral Irregularities, Passenger Incidents Review. The room was still, save for the subtle clink of someone adjusting their pen or clearing their throat. Osric Bry sat at the end of the table, his hands clasped loosely, the way a man does when he already knows what's in the folder. A woman from legal flipped the cover open, pages spread out like cards, incident summaries, witness emails, flagged messages from anonymous staff, and at the top, Kalen's letter. Simple, measured, unshakable. You don't know my name, but you should know what I saw and what I chose not to forget. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was recognition. No one questioned the truth. What they questioned now was what to do with it. We can't afford another PR fire, said Daniel Cross, director of operations. His tone was tight, hands folded too neatly in front of him. We handle it quietly. Move her to administrative. No headlines. Another voice, younger, came from halfway down the table. Elena Madsen, one of the newest board members, leaned forward. Or, she said, we can't afford to keep pretending this doesn't happen. Because it does. And this time, there's proof. Daniel's lips pressed into a hard line. So what's your alternative? Fire someone over optics? No, she said. Fire someone because she hurt people. Again and again. Osric didn't speak at first. Instead, he reached for the remote on the table and clicked through a presentation he had quietly prepared. The screen lit up behind him with just one slide. White background, black letters. The cost of silence isn't monetary, it's generational. He let the words sit for a moment before turning back to the room. We built this company on access, he said, on welcoming everyone who could afford the fare. But somewhere along the way, we stopped asking what they were paying besides money. A pause, no one interrupted him. Some people board with a ticket, he continued. Others have to carry proof that they belong every step of the way. That's not customer service. That's a system failure. Elena nodded. Others shifted in their chairs. At the same moment, hundreds of miles away, Kalen sat at his desk and clicked send on another email. This one wasn't to the executives. It was addressed to the head of crew development. Subject, training proposal, prospective flight. He outlined the idea clearly. A pilot program where passengers with first-hand experiences of bias could speak directly to flight staff, not as accusations, but as lessons. Shared stories, moderated sessions, recorded feedback. The goal wasn't punishment. It was empathy, not policy, perspective. He added a line at the end that stayed with him as he hit send. People don't change what they can't feel, so let's give them something real to carry on board. Back in the boardroom, Pauline Rennick from HR flipped through the folder again and said almost too casually, should we call in Marla to respond to this? Osric shook his head. Number. This isn't about defending her. This is about fixing us. She paused, then slowly closed the file. The conversation shifted after that, from blame to structure, from who failed to how they would rebuild. It wasn't loud. No one pounded the table or stormed out. But something began to bend inside that room. Something long overdue. Just as the meeting wrapped, Osric's phone buzzed. He checked the notification. A new email. Anonymous sender. Subject line. We're with you. He opened it. We see it too. We've lived it. We're ready to change it. 60 names followed. All frontline crew. No managers. No PR staff. Just real people who carried trays and soothed passengers and bit their tongues when things went wrong. Osric looked out the tall windows lining the room. The city moved quietly below, tiny cars in well-ordered lanes, people going somewhere, unaware of a shift happening high above them in a glass-walled room. He breathed in, then said softly, mostly to himself, looks like my sons aren't the only ones watching. The room wasn't large. It didn't need to be. Just 4 chairs, a small table, and no windows. The overhead light buzzed faintly, and the hum of the HVAC gave the air a kind of uneasy presence. It was a room not meant for punishment, but for reckoning. Kalen sat on one side, hands folded in his lap, feet flat on the floor. Osric sat to his right, calm but unreadable. Across from them, the chair sat empty, until the door creaked open. Marla Denwick entered without a word. Her uniform was replaced by a beige cardigan, plain slacks, and low heels that barely made a sound on the polished tile. Her hair was pulled back just as tight, but her posture had softened, if only slightly. She carried nothing, not even a purse. She paused when she saw both of them. Her eyes flicked from Kalen to Osric, then down to the table, where a single printed document sat waiting. She didn't sit right away. "No camera?" she asked quietly. "No lawyers," Osric answered. "No recordings. Just us." Marla pulled the chair back and slowly took her seat. She didn't speak. Kalen looked at her, but not with anger. There was weight in his gaze, but it wasn't sharp. It was steady. After a beat, he reached into a folder beside him and pulled out a printed, still image, one captured from the plane's security footage. It showed Marla standing over Kalen and Taryn, hand outstretched, blocking the aisle. He slid the paper across the table. Marla didn't touch it. "I did what I thought was best for the integrity of the cabin," she said, her voice wavering just slightly, like a violin string held a little too tight. "No one was disruptive," Kalen said calmly. "I didn't know that at the time." "You didn't ask." Marla's mouth pressed into a line. "You don't understand the pressure we're under." Kalen nodded slowly. "You're right. I probably don't. But what I do understand is what it feels like to be asked to move, without cause, while people stare at you like you're an error in the system." Marla flinched, almost imperceptibly. Her fingers curled slightly around the hem of her sleeve. Then Kalen leaned forward, voice quieter now. "Did you see us, or did you only see what you feared?" That question settled into the silence, like a stone dropped in deep water. It rippled through the air. Marla looked down. Her shoulders sank a little. For a long time she said nothing. Not in defiance, not in defense. Just nothing. Osric finally spoke. "Her file's ready. We can terminate, transfer, or send her through the new training initiative." He didn't look at Kalen as he said it. He didn't have to. Kalen sat still for a moment longer. Then he looked at Marla, really looked, not just at the woman who had humiliated him, but at the years etched into her face, the weight she carried, and perhaps the parts of her she had long stopped examining. He saw something he didn't expect, not guilt, not shame, but uncertainty. A woman who'd played by unwritten rules for too long and was only now being asked to question them. "Don't fire her," Kalen said. Marla looked up, startled. Osric raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. Kalen continued, voice firm but even. "Don't let her off easy either. She should be the first person to complete the full Perspective Flight program. Every session, every voice. Let her hear it from those who've lived it." Marla opened her mouth to protest, but Kalen cut her off gently. "Let her hear what it's like. Every day. From the aisle, not the front." Osric nodded slowly. "That's your decision?" Kalen turned to him. "It's the one that has a chance to change something." The room was quiet again, not tense this time, but sober, heavy with the possibility of something different. Marla stood unsure, then walked toward the door. Her hand rested on the knob for a moment before she turned back. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Will they ever see me as more than what I did?" Kalen looked at her, not with pity, but with clarity. "Only if you let them." She nodded once, more to herself than to them, and left the room, the door clicking shut behind her. But it didn't feel like it was closed. 3 months passed quietly, as change often does. It didn't arrive with headlines or dramatic apologies. It crept in the way seasons shift, slow, steady, hard to notice until something unfamiliar begins to feel normal. Kalen sat in the back row of a mid-sized conference room on the 5th floor of Solaris Skyway's Employee Development Center. The room smelled faintly of brewed coffee and new carpet. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, but the space felt warmer than it should have. Maybe because of what it represented, or maybe because this time nobody was pretending. A small sign on the projector screen read, Perspective Flight, Session 1, Listening Without Defense. The first speaker was a young flight attendant, barely out of training, who stood nervously at the front of the room. Her name tag read, Sophie. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the microphone. She cleared her throat and began. It was my third flight. I was serving in economy when a man with one leg asked me for help getting to the lavatory. I smiled and said, of course. But I hesitated. I didn't know why until later. It wasn't the request. It was the way I looked at him, as a task instead of a person. She swallowed hard, then added, he didn't say anything, but the way he looked at me made me feel what he couldn't say. I've never forgotten it. The room stayed still. Not cold, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from people actually hearing something. Kalen sat with his notebook closed in his lap. He hadn't planned to speak. He was just there to observe. But the truth was, he didn't need to speak anymore. The stories were already doing the work. At the far end of the room, near the exit, Marla Denwick sat alone. No uniform, no clipboard, just a woman in a navy sweater and slacks, listening with her hands folded in front of her. She didn't flinch. She didn't shift in her seat. Her eyes followed every word. When Sophie finished, Marla's gaze moved to Kalen. Their eyes met. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a wave. Just a slow, respectful nod. Nothing rehearsed, nothing defensive. Not an apology, but an acknowledgement. And somehow it was enough. Kalen nodded back, then looked away. Not out of avoidance, but completion. There was nothing left to prove. Outside, the air was crisp with early spring. Kalen stood beneath the awning beside his brother, both holding paper cups of coffee from the break table inside. The sky above was cloudless. Tyron took a slow sip, then nudged his brother gently with an elbow. You think this will actually change anything? Kalen didn't answer right away. He looked up, watching a plane streak quietly across the sky. No sound, just movement. He finally replied, it already has. We're not in seat 1A anymore, but someone like us will be. Taryn nodded, then chuckled. Yeah, and maybe next time, nobody asks if we belong there. Kalen smiled. That's the idea. Back at Redbridge International, Flight 1189 to San Francisco was boarding. A woman in her 40s, small frame, light gray jacket, hair tied back neatly, approached the gate. Her name was Lynn. She clutched her first-class boarding pass like something she wasn't sure she could trust. She stepped up to the counter, where a young flight attendant scanned her ticket. The machine beeped softly. The attendant smiled, genuine and warm. Welcome aboard. Seat 1A is waiting. Lynn blinked, then smiled back. The seat didn't feel like a favor. It felt like hers. Back in the conference room, the next speaker began. Kalen sat still, notebook unopened. And as the story unfolded at the front of the room, he let himself reflect, not just on what had happened, but on what hadn't. There had been no shouting, no dramatic showdown, no viral video, just small choices, hard ones. One seat, one voice, one room of people willing to listen. In his mind, Kalen returned to that moment on the plane, when silence felt safer than truth. And now, sitting in a room full of stories, he realized something he'd always known but hadn't put into words. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it just means the next person doesn't have to fight the same battle, and maybe that's enough. For today, sometimes real change doesn't come from making noise. It comes from choosing to be heard in the quiet moments, when no one expects you to speak. Kalen didn't seek revenge. He chose reflection, accountability, and a better way forward. Not just for himself, but for everyone who ever sat in silence. What about you? Have you ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken up? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life tales that shine light where it's needed most.